So my story began when I was 13, when a close family friend who was like an uncle to me actually passed away from pancreatic cancer. And when the disease hit so close to home, I knew I needed to learn more. So I went online to find answers. And using the internet, I found a variety of statistics on pancreatic cancer. And what I had found shocked me. Over 85% of all pancreatic cancers are diagnosed late, when someone has less than a 2% chance of survival. Why are we so bad at detecting pancreatic cancer? The reason today's current modern medicine is a 60-year-old technique. I mean, that's older than my dad. But also, it costs $800 per test and is grossly inaccurate, missing 30% of all pancreatic cancers. Your doctor would have to be ridiculously suspicious that you have the cancer in order to give you this test. So learning this, I was a bit fed up with the system, and so armed with 9th grade biology, I decided to go out and change cancer diagnostics. A bit lofty of a goal, however, I continued, and I found what a sensor for pancreatic cancer would really have to look like in order to be effective. It would have to be inexpensive, rapid, simple, sensitive, selective, and minimally invasive. And there's a reason why we haven't updated the test in over 6 decades. And that's because when we're looking for the cancer, we're looking at your bloodstream, particularly at these different protein levels and how they change. And while this sounds really straightforward, it's anything but. Because essentially you have these liters and liters of blood that's already abundant in protein, and you're looking for this minuscule difference in this tiny amount of protein. It's next to impossible. However, undeterred due to my teenage optimism, or how some people label it, complete ignorance of the field, I went to any teenager's best source for information, Google and Wikipedia, how I get through every test. And I found a database of over 8,000 different proteins that are found in your bloodstream when you have these different cancers. And it was summer break, I had nothing else to do, my schedule was clear, so I decided I'll lock myself in my room and just bash out all 8,000 proteins. By the end of the summer, I was beginning to seriously doubt my potential for any future social interaction. I mean, really, who locks himself in their room for like 3 months researching 4,000 proteins? I mean, for some very interesting back-to-school essays, like, oh, Johnny, what did you do? I went to Yellowstone. Jack, what did you do? I researched proteins all summer. However, on the 4,000th try, I finally found one protein called mesothelin. And it's just your ordinary run-of-the-mill type protein, unless you have pancreatic, ovarian, and lung cancer, in which case it's found at these very high levels in your bloodstream. But the key is that it's found in the earliest stages of the disease, when someone has close to 100% chance of survival. So now that I had identified a protein that I could use, I then shifted my focus to actually detecting this protein and thus the presence of pancreatic cancer. And on this long, epic journey, I had one epiphany moment where everything all of a sudden came together. And it came in the most unlikely of places, high school biology class, absolute stifler of innovation, particularly with my high school biology teacher. I mean, I really hated her. We did not get along. So one day, I'd escalated to the point where I was just blatantly ignoring instruction. I had snuck in an article on what are called single-walled carbon nanotubes, which are long, thin pipes of carbon that are an atom thick and 1/50,000th the diameter of your hair. So they're extremely small, and they have these really amazing properties. They're kind of like the superheroes of material science. So I was just reading this article under my desk, feeling really suave and cool, and then we were learning about these things called antibodies, which are essentially molecules that only react with one specific protein. In this case, a cancer biomarker, mesothelin, that's found in your bloodstream. And I was just sitting there reading this article, and all of a sudden it hit me. These two concepts can be combined. Essentially, you take this antibody and weave it into this network of nanotubes, such that you have a network that only reacts with one specific protein. But also, due to the amazing properties of these carbon nanotubes, this network will actually change how electricity flows through it based on the amount of protein present, and thus, I can determine whether or not you have pancreatic cancer using just a $50 ohm meter I snatched from my dad's garage. And making these is pretty simple. It's a lot like making chocolate chip cookies, which I love. Essentially, you start with some water, you pour in the antibodies, add some nanotubes, mix it up, take some paper, dip it, dry it, and you can detect cancer. And just as soon as I had this kind of epiphany moment, my biology teacher, I swear, she She had eyes on the back of her head or something, or like some secret surveillance in her room. She whirls around, red in the face. She storms up to my desk, snatches this article out of my hand, and waves it in my face, saying, "What's this actual science doing in my class? This is for mundane regurgitation of facts." At least that's what I thought she said. She probably said something much nicer. And then finally, after 30 minutes of getting lectured on respect for myself and others, finally got my article back and started doing some research. And that's when I realized I'm going to need a lab for this, right? You can't have the Andreka Household Cancer Research Program. I mean, me and my brother had done some pretty crazy stuff. For example, we have this big vat of uranium down in our basement that we ordered off a sketchy Russian website. Right next to it are some high-grade explosives that we cooked up on our kitchen countertop. We even cultured E. coli and cholera where we make our sandwiches. We did not get sucked, luckily, off that, and we landed ourselves on the FBI watch list because of this. However, we couldn't really have the cancer research program, so I decided I'm going to need to apply to some labs. So I applied to 200 different labs at Johns Hopkins University and the National Institutes of Health, essentially asking them, can I work in your lab? And I attached to it this 32-page behemoth of a document that outlined my procedure, materials, potential pitfalls, everything. And I was sitting back waiting for all these positive emails to pour in, like, oh, you're a genius, you're going to save us from cancer. I was going to be on all these magazines. And then reality struck. I got 199 rejections. I realized professors aren't nearly as nice as their glowing profile pictures make them seem. And finally, I got one acceptance at the lab of Dr. Anirban Maitra at Johns Hopkins University. And I go in for this big interview expecting super easy questions like, what's your favorite color, what's your favorite class, easy stuff. Fortunately, this guy knew what he was talking about. He was an actual doctor. I couldn't bamboozle him like I could my parents. And after an hour long of being interviewed or interrogated by 28 PhDs, I finally landed the lab space I needed. And then that's where the real fun began, because first day I go in, and I realized I had no clue I was doing in the lab. I promptly screwed up every single possible procedure. First day I had to culture some cancer cells, pretty easy. Not for me, I sneezed in the culture flask, and tentacles were growing out, and I kind of just hid it away. And finally, after blowing up my cells in a centrifuge or heating them in the incubator until they died, I finally ended up with one small paper sensor that costs 3 cents and takes 5 minutes to run. This makes it 168 times faster, over 26,000 times less expensive, and over 400 times more sensitive than our current methods of detection. But also, it has close to 100% accuracy and can detect the cancer in the earliest stage, when someone has close to a 100% chance of survival. So in the next 2 to 5 years, this patent-pending sensor could potentially lift the once dismal pancreatic cancer survival rates from 5.5% to close to 100%. And it would do similar for ovarian and lung cancer. But it wouldn't stop there. By switching out that antibody, you can detect an entirely different protein, meaning an entirely different disease, meaning you could potentially detect things ranging from Alzheimer's to other forms of cancer, even HIV, AIDS, and heart disease. The possibilities are literally endless. It could tell you what drugs you're going to be resistant to and how to optimally treat your cancers. And throughout this journey, I faced a lot of adversity. I mean, I got told no by 199 professors. I got told no by my biology teacher. I got told no by even my own parents. At least they didn't tell me to make a papier-mâché volcano for my science fair project. However, one of the greatest adversities I faced was what are called scientific paywalls. And you see, 90% of all scientific articles are locked tightly behind these paywalls. And that means when you want to read them, you have to cough up $35. And it might not even have to do with your research. And because of this inhibitive cost, my research was a ton harder to do. I mean, I spent thousands of dollars and wasted countless of hours searching for free articles. And you see, we see all these big STEM initiatives, like we need more kids interested in science. But we're sending a bit of a mixed message when the new Katy Perry single costs 99 cents and a seminal science article costs $35. Because the world of pop culture should be just as accessible as the world of science, because if we don't make it as accessible, we're just going to end up with a bunch of Miley Cyruses and Kim Kardashians twerking it out. And trust me, that's not going to solve the global healthcare crisis. But this isn't just a problem for high schoolers. This is a problem for everyone. You see, recently Harvard University released this statement saying major periodical subscriptions, especially to electronic journals published by historically key providers, cannot be sustained. Continuing these subscriptions on their current footing is financially untenable. Now, what does it say about the world of academic publishing, accessibility of knowledge, and the flow of information when Harvard University, the richest academic institution in the world, cannot afford to continue paying for its articles? How could you expect a young researcher like me to pay for them then? I mean, I have $5 compared to like a $2 billion budget, bit of a difference there. But by essentially using these paywalls, we've instituted a very harsh class system. We have the knowledge elite, those wealthy institutions and corporate labs that can afford to pay for $40,000 per year subscriptions. But then there's even a hierarchy here. You see, Yale and Harvard probably have a lot more money to dough out on articles than like Towson University. And the same is holding true for countries. I mean, the US, they can afford these articles, but I was just recently in Ukraine, and people there have to pirate their articles in order to do scientific research simply because they can't afford them. They're out of their price range. And then you have the knowledge middle class, people like you or I, who essentially have internet access, but we don't have access to these articles. We just can't afford them. But then there's a knowledge underclass. Those 80%, 5.5 billion people who don't have access to the internet, and they have no access to this knowledge whatsoever. So that means we're living in a knowledge aristocracy, where 0.008% of the world's population, those are the only ones who can read these articles. So that's like taking 80 people off the street of New York and saying, you guys are the only one who can read these articles, everyone else, too bad for you. But imagine if we could live in a knowledge democracy, where regardless of whether you're from Cambodia to China, from Mexico to Malaysia, it wouldn't matter if you're a billionaire living on less than $1 a day. You would have the exact same access to these articles. Because science shouldn't be a luxury and knowledge should not be a commodity. It should be a basic human right. Because the minds of the people must be free, and that means the minds of everyone, not the minds of the select few who can afford these articles. Science must be agnostic to where you work or how much money you have, because this tier-based dissemination of scientific research is incredibly detrimental and it's not effective. Because a girl in Pakistan should have just the same access to articles as a preeminent Nobel laureate at Harvard University, not because it's sound economics, but rather because it's equality, and that is what is morally correct. We must dare to be the change that we seek in this world, and we must have the audacity to spread that change. We as a society must abolish the middle and lower classes of knowledge. Because if we don't, we further perpetuate a system that discriminates your access to articles on the superficial factors, such as how old you are, where you work, or how much money you have. And we have the capacity to make this change. So the question we must ask ourselves now is whether or not we want our legacy to be those who marginalize those who didn't have enough money to afford these articles, or those who democratize innovation by opening these articles to the world. And I believe that we can make such a change. Because think, if a 15-year-old who didn't quite know what a pancreas was could find a new way to detect pancreatic cancer, just imagine what we all could do together. Thank you.